Good morning, church. I loved it when you said that, Asgar. It's great. We should all say that. Good morning, church. It's great to see you. Is anyone here a fan of the TV programme, The Masked Singer? Or if you're from the South, Ben, The Masked Singer? Anyone watch that programme? Yes, Abby. Do you remember a character in The Masked Singer called the Dippy Egg? The Dippy Egg. Okay, so for those of you who don't know The Masked Singer, it is a bizarre concept, but also very cool. Some celebrities hide in giant costumes. They could be an air fryer, they could be a giant traffic cone, they could be, in this case, a dippy egg, and they sing to a panel of other celebrities, judges, who have to work out who the person inside the costume is. So there's a TV presenter called Nicky Campbell. He's a radio presenter as well, and I heard him talking about it on the radio, and he said he would get picked up from his house in this flash car and driven halfway to the studio. They'd pull over, and then he'd have to pull on like a black tracksuit with a big hood and a face mask and gloves, and then he'd drive the rest of the way to the studio, so that when he got to the studio, nobody who worked on the programme would know who it was. And then he'd put on this ridiculous costume and he'd go onto the stage and he would sing. Now on the panel of judges was, her name's gone out of my head, Davina McCall. Do you know Davina McCall, TV presenter, well known? And Davina McCall and Nicky Campbell are really good friends, really good friends. They've worked together for 13 years. They know each other really, really well. She's even heard him sing before. But she was absolutely flabbergasted when he took off his egg hat and was there underneath. And this is what she said: "This is the best surprise, better than any birthday." And she was crying at this point. She said, "I love this man. Nicky is a friend. We've been working together for 13 years, and I cannot believe I did not recognize your voice. This is insane." Now we're reading from the book of Matthew today, Matthew's Gospel, and the question that I think Matthew tries to answer from the very beginning of his Gospel right to the very end is, who is this man? The same question that we're asking on the Masked Singer, who is this man? But in very different context. Who is this man? And that's why he starts the Gospel with this list of the family of Jesus. And he carries on, and he feeds to us through the whole of the story, piece by piece, who is this man? Who is Jesus? And we get to chapter 21, and it's like he presses fast forward on that, and he unveils a big piece of who Jesus is. We've learnt that he's a healer, that he works incredible miracles, that he's a teacher, and he teaches things that have changed the history of the world and blew people away at that time. And we've also been hearing that he's a promised Saviour. And it's a really important question for us to ask this morning as we sit in this church. Who is Jesus? And I think that these events on Palm Sunday are going to really help us to understand who that is. Because everything Jesus did was deliberate. He's not like me where he just wakes up in the morning and lumps about. Like, Jesus thought about what he did. He was so connected to his Father. He spent so much time with his Father, and he did what his Father told him to do. And what he did was deliberate. And what we read that he did was deliberate. And so when Jesus gets on that donkey and rides into Jerusalem, on the Passover weekend, we need to ask why. That wasn't accidental, that was deliberate. Why did Jesus do that? Who is he trying to show us who he is? So Passover, we know, is the Jewish festival where the Jewish people remember that God rescued them from slavery, horrendous slavery in the Egyptian empire, if you like, and they were rescued miraculously by the blood of the lamb put over the doors of their house, so that when the angel of death passed over Egypt, the children and the adults in those Jewish households, those firstborns, would not die, and then they escaped through the Red Sea into freedom. And around 1,300 years later, they were still celebrating that in Jerusalem, that day that Jesus turned up. So some people say that at that time, the population of Jerusalem would double. It was really, really busy. So you'd have all these Jewish people coming to celebrate the Passover, but you would also have all the Roman soldiers because they knew there was going to be trouble. Like, this was an anti-imperial celebration, you know, like this was people saying, we're going to get rescued from slavery. And what sort of time were they living in? What was it like to live in Jerusalem at that time? It was hugely tense. I mean, we know that today there is still huge tension in the Holy Land, don't we? But the Roman Empire was one of the most brutal regimes ever in history. You know, we see in those images of Easter, we see 3 crosses on the hill, don't we? But actually, around the outside of Jerusalem, there would have been hundreds of crosses because the Romans were a fan of executing people. If you'd committed a crime, if you were raising trouble, if you were just a slave who'd made a mistake, you could be crucified. This was a regime that didn't blink at killing people in the street if they thought they were going to cause trouble. So many of those people who were traveling to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover were living in hopeless circumstances, and they did not see how this Roman Empire could come to an end. But Matthew tells us about the life that Jesus was living. Amongst this brutality, the life that Jesus was living. He was performing miracles. He was feeding thousands of people. He was healing people from diseases that they'd suffered for their whole life that impacted on their daily life in an incredible way. And Jesus was healing them and setting them free. And he was doing incredible teaching. He was telling people to love each other. Even those people that hate you, you are to love them. And he was telling them to give to people in need, not to sort their own lives out, but to look after those around them. And he was telling them to pray in secret. And he was telling them to invest not in things on earth, but on treasures in heaven. And then we get to this chapter 21, and we get this big reveal. And the people asked in that passage that we read, who is Jesus? Is this who you really are? Jesus riding into Jerusalem. It's a collision with the Roman Empire. You've got, at that time, if you had kings riding into a city, if they were coming in battle, they'd ride on a horse. And if they were coming in peace, they'd ride on a donkey. Now, I don't know if you've ever done a donkey ride. It's not fast. Jesus doesn't arise guns blazing, saying, I'm going to wipe out this Roman Empire. He comes on a donkey. We once went to a farm near where I used to live in Bolton, and one of my children went on a donkey ride. And they were a little bit nervous before they got on, but they did get on, and we set off, and they must have ridden probably from here to the kitchen and back, and the entire way I was walking beside this donkey, and my child was saying to me, I like it. I don't like it. I like it. I don't like it. I like it. I don't like it. All the way and all the way back, and it takes a long time. I mean, I honestly think Jesus would have been faster walking. Do you know what I mean? Like, why get on a donkey? It's not a fast way to travel. He rides into Jerusalem gently, slowly. This is the kind of leader he is. It's maybe not really what they were after. And some people really do not like it. And I'll tell you what, the religious leaders, they really did not like it. And it makes me ask the question, when Jesus shows us who he really is, do we like it? Do we really want that kind of king? Do we want Jesus really to be the answer to all our problems now? You know, do we want him to solve all the wrong things in the world right now? Do we want him to heal us now? And when people say in answer to a problem, well, Jesus is the answer, I just want to gently question what we mean by that. Do we mean that Jesus is going to solve all our problems? Do we mean that Jesus is going to defeat all our enemies? Do we mean that we're going to get the job that we want, or that all our circumstances around us are going to be miraculously solved? Or do we mean that we'll get the car that we're after? Is that who Jesus is telling us he is? So the religious leaders didn't like it, but there were plenty of people in the crowd that loved it, weren't there? I mean, they're having a great time. They're having a right party. They were chucking their coats on the floor. Jesus is going in slowly, slowly. And they started to follow him, and they started to treat him like a king. And they started shouting, Hosanna, which means, save us. Yes, exactly, it means save us. But were they going to get what they wanted? Were they going to get Jesus that they wanted? The king that they wanted? What of, instead of bringing power and control and wealth, Jesus brings love and forgiveness and humility? What happens when that king, the one that they're shouting, save us, chooses to wrap a towel around his waist and crouch down and pick up some manky feet and wash them? Is that the kind of king they want? What happens if that king doesn't stop himself from being killed by the Roman Empire? And what happens when that rescuer doesn't wage war, but instead he takes that violence of that empire on himself? All of it. And he triumphs over it with love and with an empty tomb. And when Jesus shows us who he really is, we've all got a choice to make, haven't we? Are we going to join the crowds? Are we going to shout out, God, save us? And then are we going to follow him all the way to the cross? Are we prepared to follow a crucified king? Are we prepared to follow someone who would give up their life for the weakest, for the most vulnerable, for the most hated? And are we prepared to follow a king that says to us, I want you to do the same? A few weeks ago, I went to Liverpool for the day to meet a man called Alan Finnegan, and he runs a church on an estate, and you will not hear Alan Finnegan say a bad word about this estate, but I've looked at the statistics, and it is one of the most deprived estates in the country, economically. The people, obviously, fantastic. I met some amazing people on that day. Now, Alan, when I first spoke to him, he said to me, I've got a really boring life. He then told me his life story, which he began by telling me when he became a Christian. He was 16. He'd just started dating a girl. He'd had a little bit of dabbles in church as a young boy, but he just started dating a girl whose parents went to church, so to impress her, he started going to church as well. And one day he went round to her house for a cup of coffee, and her dad was quite ill. And 3 men came to the house that day, all independently. They didn't have mobile phones, they hadn't communicated with each other, and they each knocked on the door and said, we feel like God's asked us to come today and pray. So there was the leader of the church, one of the elders, and I think like a youth leader or just a member of the church coming past the house, knocked on the door. We feel God's told us to come and pray. So they started to pray for his girlfriend's dad. And they began to pray in tongues, so they'd speak in the language of the Holy Spirit they were praying. And Alan looked up, and he realized that these 3 men weren't praying for his girlfriend's dad anymore. They were all looking at him, this poor 16-year-old. And they said, actually, we feel God's called us today to pray for you. And so they told him about Jesus. And they asked him, do you want to follow Jesus? And he said, yeah. And that was the beginning of his walk with Jesus. And he's lived on that estate now. He didn't leave, he's lived on that estate. I think he's been a Christian about 40 years. He's led that church now for 18 years. And that is not an easy place to lead a church. They've had people come and smash their windows, they've had their roof tiles destroyed. Let me quote exactly what he said to me. Yeah, he said the church building was being set on fire by people. They smashed the roof tiles. It was really discouraging. But he just stayed there and he kept on loving them. And he told me that he absolutely loves this song. I don't know if you know this song by Chumbawamba. I'm really sorry, this is a very specific cultural reference. There is a song called Chumbawamba. Do you know the song I mean? Yes. I get knocked down, but I get up again. Ben said I should sing it, but I'm not going to sing it. Ben might. You want to sing it, Ben? No, okay. So he's been a Christian for 40 years and he's lived in Netherton for all that time. And he just loves Jesus, and he absolutely loves that estate, and the people on that estate loves him, and so many of them have come to know Jesus, and I met some of them, and they are following Jesus, and it is really beautiful. So he told me this, I've got a really boring life, and then he chucks in that he's been on Britain's Got Talent, and he got through to the semi-finals, so that was great. And then, at the end of the conversation, I said, right, so, you know, when can I come and interview you? And he said, well, actually, I've just found out that I've got cancer again, and this time there isn't any treatment for it. Well, there's 2 treatments, but they're not available on the NHS. So you can come and talk to me, but I don't know what's going to happen over the next few months. Here's a man who's going to die. And so I said to him, do you regret following Jesus? And he said, there's been times when I wished he wasn't real, because then I wouldn't have to follow him. It's a bit like Jesus' disciples said, where can I go? You have the words of eternal life. Following Jesus isn't an option. Alan saw who Jesus was, and he was willing to follow him. Not to riches, he's not gone to a life of great holidays and a flashy car and a beautiful house, but to a life of service and love, and yet loads and loads of joy. I mean, he laughs a lot. He tells me about his church services and they sound like a right laugh. We've also got a really precious friend, Kath. Some of you might have met her. She comes to stay with us every Christmas. She's, family to us. And she's one of those people that also really just, every conversation you have with her, she just speaks Jesus to you. Even when she's not speaking Jesus, you feel like a better person from being around her. And we had this letter from her last week. Over a period of time, I began to notice a weariness in me and a sense of being depleted that I could not shake off. In January, I finally went to my GP and I explained my symptoms, many of which I initially thought were due to old age. She very quickly decided to have me tested for bowel cancer. And so I entered into a very different stage of my life. As I left the surgery that day and walked back home, I had the most beautiful experience. I'd been wrapped in a warm, furry blanket of love, and I knew God was giving me a hug. From that time on, after months of anxiety, I had a peace that passes all understanding. I was weeping not about cancer, but because he loved me so much and because I was alive in a world that he inhabited too. Since then, I've had my first ever endoscopy, which showed I had cancer, and also, I don't know how to pronounce this, diverticulitis. All the NHS staff have been great and very helpful. Everything I will go through has been explained really well, and I have peace about this journey. This journey is a kind of healing that is more than cancer. It's an entering more into the life of God as I travel with him through this. And as I messaged her yesterday and said, do you mind if I share a bit of that story with my church family? She said, absolutely, share what you want. She said, I had my first appointment with my consultant this week, and she's a Christian, and she's called Dr. Christian. And she said, I just feel like God's on my case. So I share both of those stories because I know that many of us are walking through difficult patches in our lives. We might feel overwhelmed with grief. We might feel we've got a lot of family problems. We might feel lonely. We might have problems with our relationships or with our children or with addiction or with just waiting for the Home Office to give us an answer, yeah? And into our lives walks Jesus. gently, slowly. This gentle, all-powerful King. And I believe he's saying to us this morning, come and see who I really am. Come and follow me. Follow me to the cross. Come and walk with me. And then walk with me into the resurrection life. And I know many of us have journeyed with Jesus for a long, long journey. And I'm confident that, although it's not been easy, those of us who've been at this a long time, we don't regret it. And so I just want to give this opportunity today for anyone who hasn't made that decision to follow Jesus. I'm not going to stand here and give you a false promise and say you're going to have a brilliant life and you're going to get that car. And, you're going to get a beautiful house. I'm not going to promise you that. But I promise you this, you will not regret it. So if that's you, and you felt God saying to you, actually, I am calling you, and I want you to follow me, and I want you to see who I really am. You're about to start an incredible journey. If you'd like to do that, we would love to celebrate that with you. So if you want to stand now, that's quite a brave thing to do, but we'd absolutely love that. Yes, Emma. Thank you. Fantastic. I promise you guys, you will not regret it. Should we give these guys a massive clap? I'm going to invite you down to the front afterwards if you'd like to come, and someone will pray for you, because that would be a massive privilege for us. But the second thing is, I know, like I've said, a lot of people are walking through a difficult journey right now. And I feel like perhaps there's some people who feel a little bit like Alan this morning, like I kind of wish Jesus wasn't real, because do you know what? Following him is really, really hard right now. So if following Jesus feels really, really costly, I just would love for us to be able to pray for you this morning and just really get your church family around you and say, we are walking with you on that journey. I feel like I was just reminded of that picture of being on the donkey. I like it, I don't like it. Like, do you feel like that sometimes? So if that is you, I'm going to invite you as well to come up to the front and we will pray with you. For all of us, I just want to challenge us this week to take some time to really open our eyes and look at who Jesus really is. So my challenge is, pick up Matthew's Gospel and have a read. And just ask Jesus to reveal to you who he really is. And also, who is he showing around you who he is? There's loads of people around us who are asking that question, who is Jesus? And just share with him that story of Palm Sunday. Share with those people that story of Palm Sunday. And pray that God will reveal himself to them. So if you would like prayer, we would absolutely be a privilege to pray with you. Please come forward. I'm going to let Ben come and take over now, because I didn't plan this bit, Ben, so you can plan it on the hoof.
A good donkey pun there.
Thank you.
I like that. Plan it on the hoof. Anyway, yeah, thanks so much, Abby. So the band are going to come up and lead us in a song, and why don't we just stand where we are. And like Abby said, as we sing this song together, if you would like prayer, first of all, if you are one of the people who stood up and said, actually, for the first time I want to follow Jesus, then please do come to the front, either here or here, and if some of our prayer team can come to the front, we'd love to pray for you. And if you didn't stand up, but you're kind of there now thinking, man, I wish I had, or maybe I wasn't, didn't feel quite comfortable to stand up, but I'd really love to follow Jesus, then please come forwards and we'd love to pray for you. And again, as Abby said, if you feel like you're sitting on a donkey saying, I like this, I don't like this, or maybe it feels particularly costly for you at the moment, also come forward and we'd love to pray for you during this song.